When it comes to agricultural innovation, there is definitely a place for bold, daring, innovative startups. There's also a place for established, capable, and efficient corporations that can serve farmers. Bringing the two together for the benefit of the industry, well, that's an interesting challenge.
Once you start discussions, collaborations with a startup, you immediately see the contrast, the difference that exists in the mindset, in the way of doing business of the two sides. So most of my work is that of trying to break that wall.
That's Michele Lombardi, who leads CNH Ventures. Breaking barriers to innovation is what occupies a lot of his thinking. But one of the first rules of ag innovation is that positive and lasting change takes time.
It takes a very short time to have a solution that looks like it works well. It takes an extremely long time to have a solution that is actually functional, stable, and performs better than what the more manual alternative would be.
Strategic corporate investor Michele Lombardi talks about how he's thinking about the future of ag technology on today's Future of Agriculture podcast. Hello, fellow ag nerd. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Future of Agriculture. My name is Tim Hamrich, and every week you and I get to hear from the farmers, founders, innovators, and investors shaping the future of the ag industry. I really enjoyed today's conversation with Michele Lombardi about strategic investing in ag tech companies and how the corporate development process works. But before we dive into that, I'd like to take just a moment to recognize our quarterly presenting sponsor, which this quarter is Case IH. Now, as most of you already know, I'm fascinated by the way technology and innovation are shaping the future of agriculture. That's why I do this podcast. But it's also why I'm excited to partner with Case IH this quarter. Case IH designs, engineers, and produces cutting-edge farm equipment based on a comprehensive understanding of farmers' needs, wants, and challenges, integrating these insights into their development and manufacturing. For example, take their model year 25 Magnum tractor. The new Magnum is purposefully designed to answer farmers' needs in every design and engineering choice. Improved horsepower for pulling heavier loads faster, bundled, integrated, and ready-to-go precision tech for greater accuracy in the field, and a transmission farmers can tweak for improved control and performance in different tasks. That kind of design thinking is exactly where the future of ag is headed, and that's why you'll be hearing me talk to folks at Case IH at different points throughout this quarter about what they do and how they're working to push ag forward. So thank you once again to Case IH for their leadership in ag innovation and for supporting the Future of Agriculture podcast. All right, back to today's conversation with Michele Lombardi. Michele is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Development at CNH and the head of CNH Ventures. He's responsible for developing and implementing the company's long-term business strategies and in-house capabilities tied to inorganic growth. Through this work, he holds board positions in several of the independent technology companies in which CNH has invested, companies like Monarch Tractor, Stout Industrial Technology, and Zasso. Michele and I talk about how he's thinking about the future of agricultural technology, some wins and some lessons from his experiences along the way in the industry, what it means to be a strategic investor, and how he handles the convergence of startups and the large established brands he represents at CNH. Michele joined CNH back in 2008, and prior to his current role, he was the head of global mergers and acquisitions. That was from 2019 to 2021. His international assignments with the company have included Executive Managing Director for Australia and New Zealand, head of the Iveco brand in the Asia-Pacific region, head of the Iveco China branch, and Managing Director for CNH Industrial Southeast Asia and Japan. Just for fun, I asked him which of those countries he's lived in previously that he'd be most interested in going back to and visiting, and his answer was Thailand, which I found very cool. I'll drop into the conversation here where Michele is explaining what corporate development means, and that leads us into our conversation about his work at CNH Ventures.
As corporate development, we do everything that is inorganic for CNH. This ranges from acquisitions and sales all the way down to licenses and partnerships of sorts. and I've been doing this for a long time. We launched the corporate venture fund in February 2022. We already had one or two companies in portfolio, but we had never developed a container for them. So we've been very active launching it and developing relationships across the ecosystem since then, I would say. So for the past 2-3 years.
And why was that important at that time to develop a container for it, to really develop the corporate venture capital to kind of put all these efforts in one place?
Yes, in that period of time, we had developed the concept of pairing great iron with great technology. And it was a way for CNH to really put the focus on an acceleration of technology development. That acceleration came in different ways, amongst which an increased effort to collaborate externally with innovators. And that was at different levels. Naturally, you would go to the very large engineering companies in shapes of co-development that our product development would do. But what we did as corporate development, we opened the door to the collaboration with startups. So normally young innovators that are trying to break the paradigm of a very established agriculture equipment industry.
And are the metrics for a corporate venture capital arm, are they quite a bit different from a traditional venture capital firm in that you're not just purely looking for returns to your LPs, although you want that, but you're also looking to evaluate the benefit to the overall corporation in other ways?
Well said. Our primary focus is strategic. We only invest in startups when we identify a strategic driver, which could be a co-development of some technology, an integration of their technology into our products, or in some cases, a commercial opportunity where we can test the market by accelerating the distribution of a startup's product. Financial returns are tricky. They're not the priority. If we get good financial returns, nobody really mentions it. If we do not bring financial returns, then we get some criticism.
And how do you make sure that you are maximizing the amount of value CNH can get from these relationships without in some way hurting the trajectory of the company itself?
This is very interesting. And we learned a lot in these 2-3 years. The basic assumption at the starting point was, I choose a startup that I think makes sense, that can be successful, that has a unique capability, technology, team, whatever the asset is. I'm bringing money, to some degree even significant, and I am bringing a lot of capability, may that be commercial, engineering, product knowledge, farmer knowledge, access to farmers, access to dealers. So it cannot fail. In reality, it's far more subtle than that. Once you start discussions, collaborations with a startup, you immediately see the contrast, the difference that exists in the mindset, in the way of doing business of the two sides. You have a startup which is very agile, ready to test their products or ideas far before they are actually mature or ready. They attract tremendous talent that might not be an expert in agriculture, but talent that has tremendous energy and ideas in the technology they are developing. And everything they do it in new ways. On the other side, you have a very experienced team that truly understands the customer, truly understands the products, knows what it's required, can see that things will fail as they are being designed, but it's monolithic in its approach. It will not accept to modify their way of doing business in order to try the approach a startup has. And then you have this wall that builds between the two sides that gradually becomes thicker and thicker. And it makes it very difficult to truly leverage the opportunity that exists and the mutual benefit that you can derive. So most of my work is that of trying to break that wall and bring the two sides to accept the differences or recommendations. In case of the startup, accept the recommendations of the experienced people. In case of CNH, accept from the startup new ideas, accept the risk-taking approach that they have, because it might accelerate your innovation. And in some cases, this has been successful and has given us tremendous rewards.
And then I'm going to make up a hypothetical for the sake of this question, but if there is a technology that you have invested in and it's exciting, and in fact, you really see where it can add a ton of value, might that be difficult to bring to the internal team and say, I know you all have been working on this problem for years and you have a solution, but I think this one's better that this little group out of, some random place came up with. Does that create some internal tension of like, we know you are the experts at the problem, but we think this solution actually makes a lot of sense? Is that hard?
That is the primary example of that wall we're referring to. That's the number one, the not invented here issue. Yes, it could be a showstopper. In most cases, it is a showstopper.
So you have to be extremely skilled at navigating those relationships on both sides. I imagine that's got to be something that is a skill you've really developed.
You see, a company like ours, of our size and complexity, we have within a technology, within a solution, we actually have many streams of different versions, products, applications. And it's impossible to drive all of them with the same energy, emphasis, and resources internally. So normally the decision making is more granular than simply at technology level. Sometimes we might identify a very good team outside that has a great technology that at a high level, it appears like it's doing the same thing as something else we're developing internally. But then when you actually dig deeper, you understand that what you are developing internally, in reality, you're focusing on certain missions, certain applications, which to you are priority. And this other team from which we could learn a ton could actually be applied to a different mission, different solution, different end market. And by bringing it in, I can then drive a livelier interaction between the internal organic team and the external startup team. And while they might be developing adjacent solutions in a similar space, they can actually then interact and have a crossover of innovation from one to the other. So that is my magic trick. That's normally how I bring in technologies and teams without having that confrontation on a not invented here issue.
Very cool. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it would seem to me that you all not only have a different kind of system of metrics you're looking at than a traditional venture capital firm, but you also have maybe a different sort of risk profile in that you're not just looking at the risk of the business failing. There might be other risks to CNH as a brand associating with some of these startups. Is that something you have to think a lot about?
100%, yes. And again, it's all the learnings that have come from these couple of years working on the fund. We have brands that are hundreds of years old. They have come to be what they are through a very consistent work, very credible products and teams and support. Our team is obviously protecting that legacy and trying to build in line with the past, with the same discipline, with the same approach. When you collaborate with a startup and you want to bring that technology and innovation into your products, you have necessarily to move from the risk-taking, trial and error approach a startup has, which is faster for sure, more disruptive for sure, but it's not in line with our ways. You have to bring it into our engineering processes and validation and everything. And this slows down the adoption. But if done properly, it will bring great success. I can bring you an example, which is quite public. We had a startup which was called Augmenta, a Greek startup. We invested in the startup in Series A, I believe, and it was part of our portfolio, and we were managing as part of our portfolio. At some point, They were being very successful, and our team got very interested in the opportunity of integrating their technology in our product. So Augmenta was in the market. They were selling the product just like a startup. We acquired them and fundamentally shifted the focus to a factory fit solution. That has taken a couple of years. So we moved from a product that was, from a startup perspective, market ready into the market. We brought it in and started a thorough validation, ruggedization of the solution in order to integrate it into our products. This will be launched very soon as an option in our products, fully integrated. So it took a couple of years, but it will be diffused across our products. So extremely successful integration of the technology, great use of our venture capital arm. So we tested the technology, we learned from the team, we brought the team on board, and now we integrated it. Speed has changed. It took maybe a couple of years because we have to go through our validation process. But now we're confident that we have the right solution for the farmer.
Interesting. Yeah. That also explains to those of us on the outside looking in why it may seem, in some cases, why a promising startup gets acquired and then like nothing happens. But it's just this, in some cases, this lag in time that it takes to sort of get it integrated and implemented.
Yes. And to move it from an exciting prototype, a little bit more than a prototype, into a true product that has the right functionalities that work all the time. And you can see it with us, you can see it with our competitors, where they acquire technology and it takes maybe 5 years before you see it in the market. And same with us across. It might not seem that way from the outside, but from the inside, these investments or even when you have a resulting acquisition post-investment, are bringing tremendous acceleration of our innovation cycle and of our technology development cycle. Things that would have taken so much longer had we not gone through these steps now are so much quicker. We're bringing in talent and we're bringing in seed technology, if you wish, some technology that is coming across that we would have probably never had we developed it organically.
In what stage of growth are you looking at making these types of investments? And one of the reasons I'm asking that question is it would seem to me for a company to fit kind of corporate venture capital, you probably want to reduce the possibility that there's going to be a hard pivot, like to a whole nother industry that may or may not be strategically compatible with where CNH wants to go. Is that a concern? And does that influence what stage in the game you're investing?
We invest primarily in Series A, I would say. We had a couple of seeds, and B seeds we only had as follow-ons on existing investments. This is in part due to what you were considering, but mostly it's actually linked to the fact that we like Series A versus seed because we want to get a sense if the technology will actually satisfy the requirements or the expectations. So at least we need to have some functioning prototype. And we want to make sure we come in a moment when we can truly support the definition of the strategy and the direction of the product development. This is a strong capability we can bring to a startup. If a startup is already fully ingrained in their own path, which might be diverging from what we are looking for, then it's really hard to find space to collaborate. The startup is so more focused naturally on what they are developing that they will not have the bandwidth to truly collaborate with us.
Well, what about, we mentioned time frame in terms of the time it takes to integrate a new technology. But what about time frame in terms of like market readiness, especially in this robotics space where we're all being able to picture this not so distant future of automated things like harvesting and other activities, some of which is probably right on the doorstep, others of which is probably much further out. Are you just trying to get as close to the doorstep as possible? Or how do you think about timing in terms of market readiness for these types of new technologies?
It takes a long time. It takes a very short time to have a solution that looks like it works well. It takes an extremely long time to have a solution that is actually functional, stable, and performs better than what the alternative, the more manual alternative would be. Because at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're working towards higher productivity, safer environment, and better quality. If it doesn't meet these parameters, then nobody's going to come across. On our side, we know that. I mean, we have 100, 150 or whatever, 170 years of product development. So we fully understand that it takes time to develop the right solution. Sometimes the wrong expectation exists with investors that are less experienced in agricultural equipment, that distort the market's expectation and sometimes put the wrong pressure on the founding team in coming up with the solution, as it does take some cycles. And you risk to come to the wrong conclusions too early.
Well, that kind of brings me to another question I wanted to ask you, which is, we've seen the numbers and the drop of venture capital going into ag tech in recent years. How does that impact at all the work that you're doing as a corporate venture capitalist? I could see both sides of things. Like, obviously, having more money in the market is probably better for innovation in general, but you're playing a little bit of a different game, it would seem. So how does that impact you?
It impacts in the sense that we don't play alone. We play in an ecosystem. The ecosystem investors invests in startups. And we cannot be the only investors. We need other people to be part of it, to bring the necessary capital to have these companies flourish. If that ecosystem is weak, then very good startups risk failing, not because the idea is not good, but because they're not having access to capital, because the environment is too noisy. We had this tremendous boom in ag tech investments and startups 3 years ago. And that has brought in a very significant number of investors that probably didn't have a good idea of what they were investing in. And a lot of founders that maybe had experience in technology in other spaces, but didn't truly understand the space that were coming in. They didn't truly understand farmers, a conservative environment that were coming in, and what it's needed before you can actually have a successful solution. This has created tremendous noise. Initially, phenomenal expectations of great results, and then a lot of disappointment. And now I think the ecosystem is cleaning up, and it's coming to the correct investors and founders in the space, where we can have a much healthier environment in which to continue the development of new technologies.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, I know obviously your decision to make an investment has to be on very strategic grounds, but I'm wondering about your search process, your source process for deal flow, if that is more strategic in terms of like, we want to look for companies in this category, or if that's more opportunistic and then, part of the due diligence, you end up with the strategic decision.
It's a mix. We sometimes are very focused and we look for a technology that we're very interested in, or we're testing a space, and hence we try to identify the key startups in that space to accelerate our own learning of the validity of the core assumption with respect to that space. So this brings depth, and it's normally driven by our own internal stakeholders, and it creates an interesting participation of the entire organization in this. So it really stimulates the internal discussions, but it's self-referencing. So we have our internal stakeholders that suggest that we look into a space, we look into that space, and we bring back results of that analysis and the players in that space. The other activity that we do is far more open, where we continue to maintain a very wide network of relationships, much wider than the standard core of CNH. So up the value chain and down the value chain, if you wish, so that we can truly understand what's going on in the entire space, what's impacting our food chain, and how in 5 years, 10 years, CNH role could evolve in order to respond to such changes in terms of solutions, requirements, technologies, whatever is there. So This clearly is not driven by our internal stakeholders, but it's meant to stimulate a rethinking of our business model.
Very cool. And maybe to make that explanation real for us, could you use the example of Monarch and just your involvement as an investor, partner, however you want to frame that with Monarch specifically, because I think they're an interesting company.
They're a very interesting company, a fantastic team. The only electric autonomous tractor in the market for real. They are starting to build a global presence. With them, we have worked on all the dimensions that we touched on during this call. We have obviously participated financially in various rounds. We have a license agreement with them. We have presented at Agritechnica both a New Holland and Case IH version of our own tractor, of our own electric and autonomous tractor based on their technology, with an integration of their technology and our own technology, which both won an award. And we are working with them to support them in their commercial scaling. Basically, we participated along their growth with various tools as they matured and as we broke down some of that walls we were mentioning before, and we created a very tight relationship.
And when you invest alongside of other venture capitalists, because you're, as we discussed earlier, you're kind of playing a similar game, but distinctly your own strategically, does that ever become challenging in terms of company direction because you're looking for something that's, strategically beneficial?
No, we learned from a couple of mistakes in the past, and now I would say never again. We are strategic, but we are very complementary to the financial sponsors. We actually learn from the financial sponsors, their perspective, their incredible skills in supporting the startups to grow, and they are benefiting from what we can bring. We try not to disappoint. Clearly, we are a big corporate, so we're not always that agile, not as agile as a startup itself, of course. So we always have to make sure that the expectations are right. Sometimes there's a wrong expectation, a distortive expectation that since a strategic invests in a startup, then that startup is now safe and nothing wrong can happen to that startup. That's not the case. We are an investor like any other investor. We have a different take on the investment, but the fact that we invest doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to own that company.
Sure. Yeah. And there's this word disruptive, that those of us who've been paying attention in this space for any amount of time have become sort of disenchanted with, because everyone's coming out claiming to be disruptive, and then you see how few things actually disrupt anything, and you kind of think, okay, there's nothing that's disruptive. But I do worry that you become so numb to the term that people like me can miss what actually is out there and is potentially disruptive. So I guess if to the extent you're willing to share, as you look out there, what types of technologies do you see as potentially disruptive to our industry?
I've been proven wrong so many times. It's obviously very hard to guess. If we all were so good to guess, we would all be in a different place. Honestly, I think one of the biggest disruptor in this new generation of technology that will hit the agricultural space is what we all call CNH. So the combination of various technologies, because then you're putting together various technologies where the machine, whichever, is capable of analyzing its environment and taking thousands of decisions in a few seconds to adapt. And that may be as simple as a combine accelerating or slowing down a little bit in order to manage the load, or see and spray technology, or whichever. All these, which are still proving very difficult, the opportunity of truly disrupting the industry as it would allow for that transition from human controlled to fully autonomous. It's not a matter of driving in a straight line. All our equipment already drives in a straight line. There's no value in an equipment that drives in a straight line, but the farmer still has to be on board of the tractor or the combine to manage everything else. You need a solution that is capable of handling all the different requirements as it drives in a straight line. And initially, it might be just simply, allowing you to have less experienced people in the cab to monitor a few things, but not having to fine tune everything. And eventually, it will allow to have that person that was in the cab actually managing much higher value processes, while the more tedious work is done by the machine itself.
Makes a lot of sense. There's a couple different places I was hoping to go. In the interest of time, I want to be mindful of that. One is, you might hear the sentiment from farmers of like, yeah, I've seen all the billions of dollars that have gone into startups, but I'm still kind of farming this more or less the same way. I don't necessarily see how all that billions of dollars actually provided much value to me. And so you might start to develop some cynicism towards startups. And I wonder if you could just speak to the value of startups to the ag industry as you see it.
First of all, the starting assumption, I don't think, is accurate. We've been all investing billions of dollars in new technology for the ag equipment for many, many, many years. And the products that all our farmers are using are benefiting from all those billions of dollars that have been invested in new technology. Now it's just more visible, it's more out there, it's more fashionable. So people actually see the attempts to develop new technologies, all these startups coming up. But before, they weren't startups, before it was the OEMs, but they were doing the same thing. What these startups have been doing only for the last 5-7 years, maybe at this level of magnitude. So as we said before, it would take a while before these technologies clean up, become functional solutions for our farmers, and they will start percolating inside the equipment, and they might not even notice. It will gradually come in their equipment. They will give it for granted. Oh, no, now suddenly, if there's an obstacle, the tractor stops. They don't realize that maybe that is the result of the integration of a fantastic startup's technology with an OEM, where the driving a straight line solution now is integrated with sensors that can detect the environment and decide what to do. It just takes time, and it's subtle. The startups are loud because they are marketing their ideas and their genius, which is great. But in reality, then, the actual disruption, as you were calling it, is not such. It's actually a gradual enhancement and improvement of our solutions to the farmers.
Well put. Yeah. One idea that has certainly been on my mind for a while is as AI and automation and robotics continues to evolve, it seems like OEMs on the equipment side have the opportunity to actually take some margin from the chemical side. We move to more, mechanical solutions instead of chemical. I know you all invested in Zasso, I think is how you pronounce that.
Zasso.
As maybe one example. Do you see that as a long-term opportunity for a company like CNH?
Who ends up benefiting most from a shift in profitability? We will find out. I don't think it has occurred yet. Certainly, and we go back to my point before about me looking at the entire ecosystem, not just the CNH space, when I'm looking for new technologies and new ideas. Certainly, there is a dynamic shift of value along the value chain today happening. It's so important that you have OEMs investing in a lot in new solutions, like you're talking about chemical companies. So let's focus on that, on see and spray of sorts, from drones to sprayers, traditional sprayers. At the same time, you have chemical companies that are moving their focus from just developing chemicals to understanding these spray technologies and mapping technologies in order to have a role in those too. And at the same time, they're developing different chemicals so that, okay, fine, you're going to spray less, but you're going to spray a better chemical, which is going to be far more expensive. So how it will settle, if it will settle, I think it will be a dynamic environment for a while. We don't know yet. But certainly it's very interesting, and it's particularly important in this time to keep a very wide horizon of visibility when we explore how to invest or how to evolve our own business model.
Well, one dynamic that fascinates me about people in positions such as yours is you have to keep your resolve in, believing deeply in what you believe in. At the same time, you have to be willing to totally change your mind when the facts change or when the dynamics change. I wonder if there's anything you could point to in kind of recent months or years that you feel like you've changed your mind on or moved up the priority ladder for you of something that's really, really important.
There's actually many cases. As I said before, I've been proven wrong a few times. There are some technologies that appear to me as not being interesting for us or not ready for our space or surprising that people were focusing on, and then have been surprised of the opposite. And now they are very interesting. And one example for me are drones. I never thought really they could become a significant technology in our space. In reality, it is already very significant in some markets. In Latin America, they are very diffused. And they can be used for mapping, they can be used for A/B lines, they can be used for spraying. And people learn how to use them, people understand their limitations, and it's becoming a true complement to the existing technologies and new technology developments that are happening, let's say, on the ground. And it's very, very exciting. So that's a space certainly we're looking at now.
It's a great example. Michele, I've really, really enjoyed this. I was looking forward to it. It surpassed my expectations. So thank you for doing this. But I wonder, is there anything you'd like to add or emphasize before I let you go here?
No, I mean, for me, it's very important what you do. The fact that you bring people to rethink this space, to open up, to explore complexities that might be beyond their normal day-to-day, that might then bring them to improve whichever services, whichever innovation they're bringing to market, or whichever resources they're bringing to our space. It's very important. Whenever we question our beliefs and we rethink our way forward, it's when we learn. And we learn from everybody. We learn from journalists or opinion leaders. We learn from innovators. Doesn't matter if they succeed or fail. We're going to learn a lot from all these people as we learn from OEMs. So it's very exciting that you're doing this, and thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, well, that is where we will end today's episode right there. Thank you very much to Michele Lombardi for being on the show. Always find that vantage point very interesting, where he's having to look at new companies and new ideas from both a perspective of wanting to challenge the status quo, but also from the perspective of needing to see how it might fit into a big company like CNH and how it might actually serve farmers long term. So really, really enjoyed that. It was great to have some specific examples there as well for companies like Monarch or Augmenta or Zasso or whatever the case may be. So thank you again to Michele Lombardi for being on the show. You can go learn more about CNH Ventures and see their portfolio at their website, which I will, of course, link in the show notes. Thanks as well to our quarterly presenting sponsor this quarter, which is Case IH. Really appreciate them. And last but never least, thank you for your time and your attention. I do not take it lightly. I'll be back next week with another story of ag innovation.